Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Dead Rabbit Radio Classics, where we listen to an old episode with a new intro. And this is the end of our Classics week. I'm going to keep doing this. I'm going to have the Patreon supporters send me their best classic episodes. There was a bunch that we had. We had Marcus Clausen sent me Hyper Sigils. Colin Danielle sent Sandown the Clown. Elke sent Grand Soy Unified Theory and Salt Mining. Those are all really good episodes as well. They'll probably show up in future Classics weeks. But I picked these 5 for particular reasons. And this is the 5th one. This one is recommended by Love Me Some Pickles, longtime Patreon supporter. This episode, we're going to do an outro again. But I do want to say this. I totally want to say this in the beginning. I make a comment about what I would do and what I would do if a giant anthropomorphic sentient cat came to my door. I don't believe that anymore. That is not the case. That is not the case. Even though I said it in the episode, let's go ahead and listen to Dead Rabbit Radio Classics, episode 24. SpongeBob SquarePants Defecation broadcast. And we're going to talk about the Conspiracy Iceberg at the outro as well, so join us for that. An old American folktale with a surprise twist ending. And then we go back to the Conspiracy Iceberg to take a look at a broadcast of an episode of SpongeBob SquarePants that may have caused an entire nation of children to have explosive diarrhea today on Dead Rabbit Radio. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Dead Rabbit Radio. I'm your host, Jason Carpenter. I'm having a great day. I hope you're having a great day too. It's a shock to me and probably to you as well that I got through that intro without laughing at the word diarrhea. Don't worry, you'll have many more opportunities to hear me laugh about it as we continue doing this episode. I recently bought a tablet with the gift cards my mom gave me for Christmas. It's pretty awesome. Now, when I'm done recording and editing the episode, I just have Star Trek The Next Generation playing all day long. That's the one Star Trek series that I've been interested in that haven't seen every episode. I haven't seen all of the original series, not a huge fan of that, and I'm not into the new Star Trek, the new movies and the new television show. I'm not into that. I like The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise. I like all that stuff, so that's what I got. So, that's a little warning. I'm sure in future episodes, the Star Trek references will get deeper and deeper as the show goes on. So get ready for a lot of Star Trek references. One thing I've learned when I've been listening back to the show, there's one movie that I reference all the time. It's probably like every 3 or 4 episodes I make a reference to this movie, and I've never seen the movie. Ever. And it's Home Alone. I'm constantly talking about Home Alone style traps in so many episodes. And then I was like, I've never seen that movie, but it's such an iconic image of just like these improvised traps that a kid would make that they're fairly effective. So Home Alone, but I have no interest in seeing Home Alone. However, what I do have interest in, how is that for a segue, is telling you the story of Tailypo. Now, Tailypo is one of those things that is kind of like half cryptid, half 100% fictional. And you could argue that almost all cryptids are 100% fictional. But it's a story from American folklore, and I just thought there was something interesting in it. Maybe it was the visuals, maybe it was the creepiness / childlike version of the story that I came across. This idea was actually sent to me by Ramsey. So if you're like, I don't want to hear Jason read off any more American folklores, blame Ramsey. But I found the story super interesting. Ramsey emailed this to me. So, like I said, this is from North American folklore. And it's like in the early, or probably like late 1800s. It's an Appalachian. It's from the Appalachians. So it's like hillbilly story. It's the story of Tailypo. He also goes by many different names, depending on who's telling the story. He have Tailybones, Tailbones, Tailypo, Tailypo. I think they were just kind of making stuff up at a certain point. And they're like, Grandpa, tell us the story of the cat again. And he's like, which one? And they're like, Tailybones? He's like, yeah, that was its name, Tailybones. Like, I think they just started picking out different names because Tailypo is kind of the name that it goes off of. So we'll give this a shot. We'll see how this works. Because maybe it won't work. Maybe it'll suck, but we'll see. So Tailypo in the folklore was a cat the size of a dog, as smart as a human, and incredibly vicious. Long, sharp, black claws, black fur. It was a night hunter, and had an exceptionally long tail. So like, do tails make noise when they move? Like if you put your ear super close to a dog's butt, would you hear a... Is the tails wagging? I don't know. I've never done that. Anyways, here's the story. There's multiple versions of this. I'm going to tell you the story that I read, and then we have actually a director's cut, a deleted scene, an alternative ending, whichever one you want. It's all the same. There's this hermit living in the Appalachian Mountains, and he has his 3 puppies. But they're not puppies, they're like big dogs. Big hunting dogs. Now, he's up in the Appalachians. He's just a dude hanging out. Imagine he probably has a beard and a sawed-off shotgun and a hatchet. And he's just making ends meet up there. So, like walking through the woods. He's got his 3 puppies behind him. 3 big old puppies. They're actual dogs. Because if I keep calling them puppies, what happens to them is quite grim. He's walking with his 3 dogs through the forest. And he's looking for something to eat. And the dogs are like, oh, my stomach hurts. And he's like, whoa, that's weird. You guys talk? And they're like, I mean, woof. They're walking through the woods. This is not going to go well. They're walking through the woods, and he sees a rabbit, and he's like, oh, this is dope, dude. And he loads up his shotgun. I don't know why he used both blasts, but anyways, the rabbit is smeared across the forest. He's like, oh, I probably should have just used my rifle. He picks up what's left of the rabbit, eats some of it, feeds the rest of his dogs, and then he's like, I need more food than that. And he starts eyeing his dogs, and he's like, which dog has the most meat on him? But before he can answer that question, he sees a long black tail sticking out of the bushes, apparently, somewhere. He doesn't see what it's attached to, he just sees a long tail. And it's going. And he's like, that's weird, I didn't know tails made noises. So he sneaks up on whatever it is. I don't know why he just didn't open fire on whatever was attached to the tail, but he sneaks up and he has his hatchet. He's watching the tail kind of... Now it sounds like the wind, apparently, but he walks up to the tail, takes his hatchet, and just cuts the tail off of whatever it's attached to. He hears a loud yelp from the bushes, and it takes off. And he's like, oh, okay, that ended well. Now he has like this, I don't know, let's say it's like a 2-foot-long tail, still kind of squirming and squirting blood in the bushes. And he's like, I'm just going to eat this right here. I'm just going to eat it whole. So he picks up the tail, and he opens his mouth. He's swallowing the tail whole, and dude, I'm just like, take your time, Hermit. Just Hermit. Just okay. Breathe through your nose. Breathe. Yeah, there you go. Is that better? The Hermit nods. The Hermit nods as he's breathing through his nose. Swallows the whole tail. The dogs are like, what the hell just happened? We wanted some of that. Hermit's like, yeah, you wouldn't like that. It was disgusting, but I was super hungry. So they go home. That night, Hermit's laying in bed, and he hears a voice. He hears a voice in his dark bedroom. I don't know if he had a bedroom, because he's Hermit, so it might just been a one-room shack, but anyways, he hears a voice. And the voice says, Tailypo, Tailypo, who has my Tailypo? I'm glad I'm a camp counselor at a fire now. That is what my life has become. The Hermit's like, oh my god. He totally like freaks out. He wakes up. There's a huge black cat. It's the size of a dog. It's just what I described at the beginning of the story. Standing at the foot of his bed, looking at his stomach, and is like, Tailypo, Tailypo. And the Hermit goes, that's weird. I thought that was your name, and that wasn't what was in my stomach. And the cat looks confused for a second. Hermit calls in his dogs. And Tailypo jumps out the window, assuming he has a window, again, because he's a hermit. Tailypo walks to the front door, opens it, and leaves. And the dogs chase after him. And the Hermit's like, oh man, that was close. I don't know what that thing was. Eventually, the dogs come back, but only 2 of them come back. And he's like, that's not good. Luckily, I didn't really like that dog that much, so whatever. He goes to bed. Later that night, he hears the door open again. He's like, uh-oh. Tailypo, Tailypo, who has my... And he's like, dogs, get him! Like, he's totally freaking out. And the dogs chase Tailypo back out of the cabin. Dude's freaking out. Only 1 dog comes back. And the dog that didn't come back, that was his favorite dog. Now the Hermit is actually feeling sad. He's kind of left with the milquetoast dog, the dog he didn't like. He's like, damn it. But he's trying to go back to sleep for whatever reason, why he just didn't stay guard or lock his door at this point. Tailypo shows back up, repeats his phrase, Tailypo, Tailypo. Hermit sends a dog after him, you get the point. This time, the last dog doesn't come back. And even though the hermit didn't like that dog, it was at least his last form of protection. The hermit stays up with his hatchet and his shotgun and is hiding under the covers. And he hears the door open again. And Tailypo comes back in, jumps on the man, disarms him. They're wrestling over the shotgun. First round goes off. Wrestling. Second round goes off. Tailypo takes the shotgun, unloads it, dismantles it, throws it in the corner like Jason Bourne. And then he just knocks the hatchet away. He's like, no, he disassembles the hatchet too. He's like, turns it into a bunch of splinters. And then Tailypo crawls on top of the hermit and says, I want my Tailypo. Just get to the point. I'm not going to say my phrase again. The hermit's like, I don't have your Tailypo. And Tailypo looks at him and says, yes, you do. And then begins ripping his stomach apart with his long claws. Now, I'm going to take a point to remind you that this story is often repeated in a book of scary stories for children. It is actually based on a real tale from the olden times in the Appalachians. But because it has a cat, and because it says the same thing over again, and it has like this numerical like countdown, they've made it for kids, but there's two original versions. One, Tailypo rips his guts out, shreds him, pulls his bloody, half-digested tail out of the hermit's stomach, and then looks at the camera and says, now I have my Tailypo. As the man slowly bleeds out, I imagine that Tailypo just left his body there, and the wounds were bad, but it wasn't an instant death. So he laid there for probably about 10 to 12 hours, bleeding and screaming as the stomach acid was kind of dissolving his own skin. But actually what killed him was exposure, because Tailypo left the door open, and it was the dead of winter. That's not a good story to tell your kids. Now, I don't think the camp counselor goes on. Then in the third hour, he was still in agony as the stomach acid spilled all... No, they probably leave that part out. But there's another part that most versions leave out. This was the part where I was like, okay, this is the story. This is the ending that I'd want to hear. It's the same setup, but one version ends like this. Tailypo jumps on the bed, disarms the man, and says, you have my Tailypo. And then he sodomizes the hermit. Now, that's definitely left out of the children's version, because everyone would be like, let's sodomize! And he's like, oh, the camp counselor is like, uh-oh. Should have read this other version. But in one tale of the story, whoever invented this idea is like the M. Night Shyamalan of the Appalachians. You have this creature, does that mean he was sodomizing the dogs? Are the dogs like left in the forest just kind of like laying there smoking cigarettes? They're like, that was actually kind of fun. You don't knock until you try it, right? And the other dog's like, yeah, that was quite amusing. And then Tailypo sodomizes his hermit. Now, I'm going to have to say this, just to get this out here. I'm neither furry nor gay, but if a sentient, anthropomorphic, demonic cat appeared out of nowhere and wanted to have sex with me, I'm down. Like, you can't pass that up. Like, that's not a bad ending to that story. That's nowhere near as bad as bleeding out and dying of exposure, or being eaten, having your guts ripped out by a cat looking for his tail. If the ending of the story is the cat simply sodomizing you, and then you live, you're just smoking a cigarette with your dogs, and you're like, that was surprisingly fun. I'll take that ending. 100%. Because you live. I mean, here's a pro tip from an old-time bachelor. You can only bang so many baristas. At a certain point, if an anthropomorphic, human-sized, intelligent, evil cat showed up at my doorstep and was like, hey, I saw you on Tinder, I don't know, I don't think I'm going to pass that up. I don't think I'm going to pass it. Plus, if I did, it would probably just rip my guts out. But, you know, at a certain point, that story is far more intriguing than just getting your guts ripped out. That's the story of Tailypo. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hoped you learned a little bit about me in the process. Let's go ahead and move on to our next story. Okay, so we got Tailypo out of the way. Smoking a cigarette. We're oddly relaxed. A little sore, but not as much as we thought. Not as much as we thought we'd be. But it's time to get back to work. Flick the cigarette to the side. Unfortunately, we're in the Appalachians and it's dry now and everything goes up in flames. But that's actually perfect, because what we're going to do is we're going to use the burnt out forest as a landing pad. Somehow I can whistle. A carpenter copter shows up because we got a long journey ahead of us. We're leaving the Appalachians, and to be totally fair, I don't know where those are at. I think they're somewhere around the East Coast. It's like a hillbilly country. I think it's like higher up in Tennessee, something like that. I don't know. Anyways, we hop in the carpenter copter. We're going to Brazil. Now, I have a lot of listeners in Brazil, and I have a few friends in Brazil. I want to say this up front, guys. All the information I have about the water quality in Brazil is strictly from news articles that I've read. If I'm wrong, let me know. I'm not trying to say Brazil has the dirtiest water in the world. However, the water supply in certain parts of Brazil, especially Rio, will play a part in this story. So we're on the carpenter copter. We are flying over the Atlantic, I think, headed down to Brazil. Now, while we're there, we want a little in-flight entertainment, right? So I go, hey guys, I got this DVD. I got this DVD of this SpongeBob episode. just one SpongeBob episode. You're looking at me like, why would you have a DVD of just one? Oh no, don't worry about it. Here, I'll put it in and you watch it. But you might want to like sit to where your kind of butt is hanging over the side of the copter. You're like, what? What's going on here? And before you can answer a question or move to the side of the helicopter, I start the DVD. Now, this is a SpongeBob episode. On the carpenter copter, we have, in particular, we got all of you guys, but we got Romantis Anon, and we got Marcus Atius Virilis. Both of them personally requested the SpongeBob SquarePants story you're about to hear. They both are smart, and they are leaning their butts off the side of the copter. I know you're still questioning whether or not you should, but please do that. Seriously, right now, hurry up, the episode's starting. And they both hit me up on YouTube to request this, so I wanted to give a shout out to them. So, helicopter. Okay, that noise will make sense in a little bit. But as the helicopter lands, we land at a airport in Brazil. Very, very messy. Security guards come up. They're not only holding their guns, they're also holding their noses because of the smell. So, SpongeBob SquarePants Defecation Brazilian broadcast is the conspiracy theory we're going to be talking about today. It sounds like a bunch of words thrown together, and it most likely is. It most likely is just what we call word soup, where someone picked the funniest words and put them in a phrase. However, but what it is, the theory is this, is that there was an episode of SpongeBob SquarePants where when Squidward was singing a song, hit the brown note. The brown note is a, as far as I know, it's mythical, that it doesn't actually exist. But the brown note is apparently a sound frequency that causes you to poop your pants. That's why they call it the brown note. They've done a lot of stuff on it. South Park's done an episode on it. Mythbusters did an episode on it. But the conspiracy theory is that there was an episode of SpongeBob SquarePants that had weird visual imagery and Squidward singing, because Squidward plays the flute or the clarinet. And he played a brown note in the show, and it made a bunch of kids in Brazil have poop their pants. However, it wasn't just that. It was that they pooped out half their body weight. Most of these kids in one sitting just 4 pounds of poop. Just watching the episode of SpongeBob and you're sitting there and you're eating your goldfish crackers and you're like, how long would I have to make that noise to equal 4 pounds? A lot. That would be a long noise. That would be like a loop I would have to do. So, for a second there, I was thinking, maybe I should try to do it for 4 pounds. But anyways, so that's a conspiracy theory. Now, the question is this. We have a couple questions about that. 1, did it really happen? And 2, why? So, as far as did it really happen, it's on the conspiracy iceberg, but that doesn't mean anything as far as the conspiracy itself being true. We can't say for sure that it 100% happened. There's no proof. The Nickelodeon never came forward. And, there was always that thing about the Pokemon episode that was causing epileptic seizures that was shown in Japan. There's been a lot of controversy about that because kids did go to the hospital for that. Kids did have to go to the hospital for that. And the broadcaster was saying it had nothing to do with this. It was some psychosomatic mass hysteria that was going on. However, we won't show that strobe effect ever again. That strobe effect has been repeated, and we haven't had these mass epileptic seizures. Hasn't been repeated on broadcast television, but it was shown to other people because when they were trying to figure out what caused these kids to freak out, doctors and scientists and stuff like that were watching the video, and they're like, this wouldn't have caused it. There must have been something else that caused it. And the kind of consensus last I heard was that one kid probably had an epileptic fit due to it because he was epileptic, and then there's just this mass hysteria thing going on where other kids are just like, I don't feel good, mommy, and that got wrapped up in this whole thing. So, could Squidward have hit the brown note and made a bunch of kids poop 4 pounds of poop in a heartbeat and end up in the hospital? We don't see any news like we did with the Pokemon of a mass amount of kids being rushed to the hospital for what would only be described as explosive diarrhea. We've never seen any of those reports. Now, part of the conspiracy is it was covered up because the SpongeBob SquarePants Defecation Brazilian broadcast happened right before the Rio Olympics. And so they didn't want the publicity that a bunch of kids were just everywhere as world leaders and athletes from all around the globe are coming there, and they're like, oh, gross. Like, they didn't want that. Now, the other side of the theory is that it wasn't a actual SpongeBob SquarePants broadcast. Someone had jacked the signal. Someone basically made their own SpongeBob episode and inserted it into the feed for the actual SpongeBob channel or where the SpongeBob episode would be. So it was a fake episode specifically to make people do this. First explanation was it was a SpongeBob episode and it just happened to have this effect. Then the theory was, no, it was a bootleg SpongeBob episode that was specifically designed to make kids go poop. Just blow their butthole up. So let's take a look at that. Now again, we don't have any proof that the SpongeBob SquarePants defecation incident ever happened. We don't. And we do have it with the Pokemon story. At least the kids being rushed to the hospital. But let's look at the idea that there was a bootleg episode. Is it possible that someone would have a reason to make all the kids in a particular geographic area have uncontrollable diarrhea to the point where they're being transported from their home to the hospital? So keep that in your mind for a second, because we're going to work with that in a moment. However, one of the interesting pushbacks to the whole SpongeBob SquarePants idea of it being a broadcast is that we're leading up to the Olympics. So we're in the year 2016. And this is where I'm not meaning any insult to my Brazilian listeners or my friends in Brazil. But when the Olympics were coming up, there was a serious concern with the water supply in Rio de Janeiro. Here was a headline. This was a headline from an article when I was researching this. Rio 2016. Swimmers need to ingest only 3 teaspoons of water to be almost certain of contracting a virus. So in the city of Rio, you have waterways that are infected with raw human sewage. And this water can make you have diarrhea. They were telling people who are coming over to Brazil, don't put your head underwater. If you don't want to get sick, don't put your head underwater. And swimmers were like, that's not possible. So where you would have swimming and rowing and all these water-based events, that water was coming from waterways that were infected with bacteria and toxin. That would make you sick. Here's a quote. Water pollution has long plagued Brazil's urban areas, where most sewage isn't collected, let alone treated. In Rio, much of the waste runs through open-air ditches to fetid streams and rivers that feed the Olympic water sites and blight the city's picture postcard beaches. So you would have a guy who's been training in a sterilized pool, in a chlorine-infested pool in deepest Russia for the past 18 years, and now he's swimming in this pool that is full of bacteria and viruses. His immune system isn't going to be able to handle it. It said prime beaches remain deserted because the surf is thick with a putrid sludge and periodic die-offs leave the Olympic lake littered with rotting fish. So it was not the cleanest water supply. You go, what does this have to do with SpongeBob SquarePants? Here was a bit of pushback on the conspiracy theory. There was no SpongeBob video. There was no hijacked broadcast. What happened was just the water supply over there is so bad that you had an outbreak of some sort of stomach disease, some sort of intestinal bug that did cause a bunch of kids to poop out half their body weight. And they covered it up. The Brazilian government was like, dude, it's 3 days till every major country, and some minor ones, come here to compete in the games. We don't want the news headlines to be about all these kids in the hospital. So just bury it. And from that, If a bunch of kids got sick and started pooping and they didn't hear anything about it in the media, but they're like, well, that's weird because I got sick and this other kid down the street got sick and this kid got sick and no one was explaining it was some sort of intestinal bug in the water that was going around because they didn't want to have the bad coverage. The conspiracy theory could have pulled up and they said, it's weird that all of these kids got sick around the same time and that's the time that SpongeBob SquarePants is showing up. But again, if it was that intestinal bug, we didn't see any massive outbreaks of explosive diarrhea among the Olympians. So it could have just been, first off, it could have never happened. There could have never been an outbreak of 4 pounds of diarrhea across Rio. That's the most logical answer, and the whole thing is just made up. Secondly, it could have happened, but it had nothing to do with SpongeBob. It just had to do with really, really bad water quality, and that story was covered up. And then 2, it happened. It was related to SpongeBob for whatever reason. Someone either did it on accident, someone put in a frequency that shouldn't have been there, or someone did it on purpose. So, let's use our imagination caps. Carpenter Copter has landed in Brazil. We're spraying it out because I told you to hang your butt out the side. You didn't, and you watched the episode. So we're spraying it out as you shamefully go out to buy a pair of hot pants. And we start to explore the idea that what if, I have no proof of this, but we're just using our imagination caps. What if the SpongeBob broadcast was real and it was a weapon? So around a couple months before the Rio Olympics, there was a rumor going around in conspiracy circles, mostly on 4chan's conspiracy board. And it might have even been on their politically incorrect board. But there was a rumor going around that in, I think it was September, October of 2016, a group of people were going to release an airborne version of Ebola. They were going to launch it first in China, and then they were going to let it spread across all of Asia, Europe, and down into Africa. And the second it started to appear in China, this group, whoever they were never named, it was this nameless group, were going to use their influence to shut down the airports and waterways in and out of the Americas. So North and South America would be completely safe from this. The second it took hold in a city in China, everyone is going to shut down. And the rest of Europe would really have nowhere to go. And the goal of this airborne Ebola virus was to create a world where the Americas ruled supreme. It wasn't just the United States. It was basically like this us versus them, us being Canada, United States, and all of Central and South America, and Mexico. It obviously didn't happen. But what was interesting was it was going on for a while. I know people who listen to the show who are old-timers on 4chan will remember that story. Because it was building for a while. And I remember thinking, that would be awful. And of course, it's possible to bioengineer a weapon like Ebola and make it airborne. You're taking a big risk that you can shut down their waterways before that one person in China hops on a plane. But, the reward is you conquer the globe. You have a planet now that has 2 continents worth of people, and you have everything else. And I guess Australia, well, if they didn't shut down their airways enough, they would be taken over, Japan and all that. But that was a conspiracy theory. And I remember thinking, that could happen. That could happen. But then someone beat us to the punch. So if that conspiracy theory was true, if there was a group planning to unleash airborne Ebola in September of 2016, someone beat us to the punch. There was a huge outbreak of Zika. And for the first time, a lot of people, I had never heard of it before. For the first time, a lot of people all around the world were introduced to the Zika virus. Now, the Zika virus, it's a mosquito-borne virus. You get bit. Once you're infected, you get like a headache. You don't feel that good. You're like, oh, I feel a little lethargic. And then after about 10 days or so, you feel better. You have it in your system for up to 81 days. You're still contagious. And so it takes a mosquito to bite you, but you can spread it through different bodily fluids. And the problem is that if a pregnant woman gets the Zika virus, her baby gets this disease, is at a higher chance of getting this disease called like microphalangy, where they have a little tiny head. So massive brain damage. And we started seeing this huge outbreak of this disease in Brazil and in South America. And it came to the point where it spread to America. It came to the point where the governments were like, don't get pregnant. Where the Pope, who, the Catholic Church is against birth control, the Pope was like, it may not be a bad thing. if it prevents the Zika virus. Not having a baby may not be a bad thing if it prevents Zika, because the effects of having a baby infected with this microphalange is lifelong. And I remember watching that virus get a lot of coverage in the media, and I thought someone beat us to the punch. If that conspiracy was true, that the Americas were going to launch this airborne Ebola, someone on the other side said, yo, really? Really? You want to do that? Let me show you what we've developed. Now, the Zika virus had been around for a while, but they had never made a connection between Zika and microphalange. And I know I might be pronouncing that wrong, but the tiny brain disease. And they don't know if it was a new strain of the Zika virus. They don't know why the Zika virus was so they don't know why the Zika virus was so aggressive this time. And again, in make-believe conspiracy land, you can imagine this. One group is going to launch an airborne Ebola in Asia. Another group says, if you really are going to do that, we will sterilize your entire countries forever. Here's a taste. They release this biological weapon in Brazil, and we see it happen, and they go, okay, if you do your Ebola thing, we're going to make that a permanent thing. Like, here's a little taste of what the Zika virus can do. We can make sure every mosquito that's possible will carry this stuff. We can turn this airborne. We may not be able to Ebola melt your blood out, but we can make sure that every 5th pregnancy from now on in all of your populations, they'll be born with a little tiny baby head. So what do you want to do? And so the Ebola people backed down, and then the Zika virus people said, okay, we're not going to release our full, because it's bad, but it's not as bad as we thought it was going to be. The Zika people are like, okay, you're not doing the Ebola thing, we're not going to sterilize your entire continents. Do I have any proof of that? Absolutely not. I said earlier that Zika could be spread by bodily fluids. A very little known fact, one of the things that can spread Zika is diarrhea. If you have diarrhea, all the liquid can actually spread it. So people at the time knew, stay away from mosquitoes, stay away from semen. Semen can also spread the Zika virus. But they didn't know about the diarrhea, it being spread through diarrhea. If a little kid has Zika and he goes, oh, I don't feel good, and then 10 days later he's feeling totally fine, not thinking anything of it, he still has a Zika virus in him for 81 days. And the way that this Zika virus, if you wanted it to be a bioweapon, you would need it to target predominantly women, because those are the ones that had to worry about getting pregnant. So let's wrap this all up in a bow. You have a group in America that wants to send Ebola to Asia and win this a war, whatever they're waging. The powers that be are fighting against each other. Then you have a group in Asia, Europe, Africa, wherever they're based, and they go, we're not going to let them do that. So they spread the Zika virus in Brazil. And it's not catching on as quickly as they want, because it has come very clear to the health organizations in the Americas, Zika virus is being spread by mosquitoes, and if we can protect pregnant women from mosquitoes, then we can slow the halt of this tiny brain disease. But the people who aren't being protected from mosquitoes, which would be men and children, because they don't have to worry about getting pregnant, they're still getting bit by mosquitoes. They're still like, man, they're getting infected with that Zika virus. So someone on this group, someone in this other conspiracy organization says, well, we know that the women are being protected from mosquitoes because they put all this mosquito netting up. But these kids are still outside playing football. So what if these kids who have Zika, we can infect their mothers in another way? People are like, well, how do we do that? And they're like, well, if they have diarrhea and the mothers touch that, they can get the Zika virus. And if they're pregnant or going to become pregnant, this will happen to their children. And then again, the health organizations in the Americas would go, how in the world did all these women just get it? We have all these protective things. We're telling women not to be anywhere near mosquitoes. We're providing mosquito netting for these houses and things like that. So if you wanted to have a bunch of people who had the Zika virus spread it to their mothers in an afternoon, insert a broadcast on television, that a one-time broadcast, no one else would see it. It would just disappear into the ether after it was shown. That would cause all these little kids all over the city to have explosive diarrhea. It would make such a mess. And the mother's cleaning it up and taking her kid and taking the kid to the hospital, and the liquid is everywhere. It's in the taxi cab. It's in the waiting room. It's on the hospital bed. And every single person who touches it would be like, gross. But they wouldn't think of Zika. They wouldn't think that this little bit of liquid can ruin a baby's life forever. This is how we're going to help it spread. And this is another warning to the conspiracy group that's trying to pulverize 70% of the human population, that we are truly willing to redefine the term fighting dirty. And the aftermath of that. It would be a messy afternoon, but even if you only hit 1/10 of the pregnant women in that city, you have women who already have kids, so the chances of them having another kid is higher than just a mosquito flying and biting random women. They get the Zika virus, they have a kid, they have this problem. The tiny brain disease not only affects the family, it affects the economy. Governments need future workers to keep going. So they may try to take us out with Ebola over here, but we can devastate them right now. And we will let them know with this 30-minute cartoon that all bets are off. They better not try anything in a few months. And oddly enough, there was no airborne Ebola, and the Zika virus has pretty much kind of fallen to the wayside. It still happens, but not nearly as bad as they thought it was going to. Was there a bioweapon attack planned for Europe, Asia, and Africa? Was it stopped by a bioweapon attack in South America? Who knows? Most likely, probably not. However, it's an interesting story. And I have no proof of any of it, but I think it's an interesting story. And sometimes, that's all you need to have a good episode, is an interesting story. DeadRabbitRadio@gmail.com is going to be our email address. You can also hit us up at Facebook.com/DeadRabbitRadio. Twitter is @JasonO'Carpenter. Dead Rabbit Radio is the daily paranormal, conspiracy, and true crime podcast. You don't have to listen to it every day, but I'm glad you listened to it today. Have a great one, guys. So that was an episode. You got sound effects, got poopy sound effects, you got Tailypo. First off, I want to give a shout out. There's a YouTube channel called Going Obscure. They do like 3 or 4 minute long conspiracy videos. They cover obscure stuff. They're also hitting stuff on the Conspiracy Theory Iceberg. They actually covered SpongeBob SquarePants Defecation broadcast, and they cited me. They cited me and this episode as one of their sources, and they're like, Dead Rabbit Radio podcaster Jason Carpenter believes. I don't know if they said the word believes, because I don't believe it, but my theory is what they put forth. That's awesome, and I recommend you guys checking them out. They've been around for only a couple months now. They actually reached out to me about working with them, doing an episode with them, and I haven't responded yet, and they actually emailed me about a month or two ago. Here's a little tip for all you people who email me, because sometimes people email me and they get a response within 30 seconds, and other times people email me and it takes me like a month. It literally is like the time of day. Like it's never, sometimes I'm walking down the street and I get an email and I look and it's like, this is the most amazing story ever, and I'm reading it, I read the first couple paragraphs, I'm like, oh dude, this story is going to be great, and then I never respond. You hear it being covered on the episode and I'm giving you a shout out. Sometimes I'm literally like, I've just put down an empty bottle of Coke, and I'm sitting there, and my phone bings, and I look at it, and I answer it right there. They could be like an 8-paragraph email, and I'm answering. It's really luck of the draw. So Going Obscure, I'm not ignoring you, and I'll know that I have these emails to answer, but I've thought about it. Again, like on yesterday's episode, I'm hesitant to do stuff recording-wise with other people, not because I'm Going Obscure, they're great. They have a really cool channel. But you get into all that legal stuff with, signing documents, who owns the rights to the episode, the voice, and all that stuff. And I'm just a pragmatic person. On the one hand, I'm a hobbyist when it comes to this. But on the other hand, I think 5-10 years down the road. So whether or not I do anything with Going Obscure in the future, definitely check out their show. I'll have the episode link in the show notes. It's like 3 minutes long. It's really cool they're able to compress this information down. Let's talk about Tailypo. Then we'll go back to the Conspiracy Theory Iceberg. Let's talk about Tailypo. Tailypo was a recommendation, and it sucks because I don't remember who recommended it to me. I gave them the shout out on the episode, but Tailypo is an interesting story because it's so off-brand. It makes sense because it's a cryptid, but what I'm doing is telling a fairy tale or a folk tale. And I actually have lined up 5 more of these stories, and I've been collecting them since Tailypo. This episode came out, it was super popular, people loved it. And I go, oh yeah, and I enjoyed recording it. So I went out and found all of these insane fairy tales and folk tales and stuff like that. And I don't think I've recorded another one. I may have covered another one. I may have done one other story where I basically tell a fairy tale. I have a vague recollection of that, but I have 5 ready to go. But I think this one was lightning in a bottle. I don't know if I could replicate this. I have a bunch ready to go, and whenever I get ready to do them, the other day I was going to do one about the hen and the rooster, which is just this super bizarre story about, like, animals dying. There's a funeral, and, like, a piece of coal shows up, and they're like, piece of coal's, like, sitting in a river, and says, hey, guys, jump on my back, but then he, like, evaporates. It's such a weird story. And, like, chickens are carrying dead roosters, and this fox showed up and said, hey, can I, like, climb on top of the rooster? And it's weird. I mean, it's one of the most weird folktales I've ever read. And I've wanted to cover it, and I've had it ready to go a couple times. And I think back to this Tailypo episode, and I want to do another episode like this, but I think it might just be lightning in a bottle. You can't force stuff. I mean, you can. There are times where I'm recording episodes. Here's some behind-the-scenes stuff for you. And there are times where I'm suffering performance anxiety while I'm recording. It's usually Monday's episode, because it's the first episode that I've started after taking a break. I'm trying to tell a story, and I can tell it's not working. And I start sweating. Start sweating really badly. Like, the jokes aren't landing. Because remember, all of this stuff is improv. Like, the notes, I have basic facts of the story, but any joke that I tell, you can tell that I'm making it up because I'm laughing at it. It's the first time I've ever thought of the joke. I'm reading these notes, and I go, oh, wait, not in the cornfield, through a cornfield. We don't have corn inside of our bodies, or whatever stupid joke it is, and you'll hear me laugh because I've just thought of the joke. Those are all impromptu. So when I sit down, like, every joke in this Tailypo episode, none of it was written out. So when I have my notes and I'm going through it and I start laughing about, like, the dog doing this, that's my favorite dog, all this stuff. I mean, your mileage may vary whether or not you think it's funny, but I think it's hilarious. I edit out a ton of bad jokes. But sometimes I'm recording that Grease Humanoids episode that came out a couple weeks ago, that was a mess. That episode was so bad. Sabine came over later that day, and I was just pouring sweat. She's like, dude, what is going on? I go, dude, I'm trying to record this episode about Greek humanoids. And it's awful. It was so bad. I actually still have it. I may release it at some point. It's like a stand-up comedian just bombing on stage and then knowing they have 30 minutes left. Like, they have to fill 30 minutes. And I just remember just pouring sweat. What I did originally was a Choose Your Own Adventure episode, the Greek humanoid. And the whole episode was about that. Oh, God, it was awful. It was so bad. And that's one of the things, like, my little brother listened to an episode of this podcast the other day, the episode with the handicapped ghost walking across the street. And he had listened to a couple episodes, like he probably listened to 3 episodes out of the first 20 and stopped. He's not a podcast guy. He listened to the newest episode and he's like, dude, it's so good. Like, the podcast is so much better than it used to be. Part of the thing is knowing what makes a good episode and what makes a bad episode. Before, I was like, oh, these are the stories I have, so I'm going to record them, and I'm going to just hammer them in, and they're going to fit. And it really hasn't been until episode 10, season 10, when I started. It really was that late in the game when I started going, okay, let's really think about the stories we have each episode. Now, I lucked out. There's a lot of great episodes in those first 400 episodes. There's a lot of great ones. More so than the bad ones, but those bad ones stick out like a sore thumb. And then, so that Greek humanoids, I was embarrassed to record it. I was embarrassed to release it, so I wasn't going to. Where was I going with it? So the Tailypo stuff. So I could record one of these fairy tales. Oh, this guy, and then his bunch of his brothers get eaten, and then he's like cutting a giant open and eating porridge out of his stomach or something like that. That wasn't the Hen and the Rooster one. That was a different one, but I was like, does it work? Does it work? So I think I might have done one other fairy tale, but the Tailypo thing worked perfectly. But let's go ahead and move on. We've talked a lot about Tailypo. Let's move on to the SpongeBob SquarePants Defecation broadcast. The episode is what it is. This episode took a lot of research to do. I had a lot of fun doing it. I was able to tie it back into some conspiracies from my old days, back when I was really into stuff on Godlike Productions and Vigilant Citizen and Above Top Secret and all this stuff. Old school conspiracy theory. I always love bringing that stuff to the show because conspiracy theories so quickly just die off. They don't have a long lifespan. The episode itself stands on its own. But what I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about the conspiracy theory iceberg, because I get a lot of requests from that. And I've talked about this a couple times on my live stream, on my Patreon-only live stream, but I don't think I've really expressed it well to everybody. The conspiracy theory iceberg is so fascinating, not because of the topics on it, but because the people who follow the iceberg. Take this, for example. If SpongeBob SquarePants Defecation broadcast was not on that conspiracy iceberg, but Tailypo was, and I did an episode about SpongeBob SquarePants Defecation broadcast, I would I would definitely get a comment on that video, like I do on a lot of videos, when you're going to do the iceberg again. Just because it's listed on the iceberg, it's weird. It gets an elevated status over other conspiracy theories or other events. The Dropa stones are on the conspiracy theory iceberg. They're high up there, but they're on there. The plane of jars, which you can, when you type in plane of jars, it pops up on Wikipedia. That's on the conspiracy theory iceberg. The alien invasion of Casablanca is not. The vampire sex cult of Yerba Buena is not. Correct me if I'm wrong, but monkeys aren't real. I think that might be on there. Mormon Bigfoot's on there for sure. But I did an episode about the Guatemalan stone head, which was this supposed alien-looking head, and then it turns out that it was a guy who'd carved it because his wife had passed away, and it was the image of his wife who had European features. And then he left in the jungle, overtook his farm, and then people were hacking it away and found the statue. That's on the conspiracy theory iceberg. When I found that story, I didn't know it was on there. I just covered it. And then later on, I found that it was on the conspiracy theory iceberg. And it's funny because, and it's a great story. I'm not discounting that story, and I'm not discounting a lot of stuff on the conspiracy theory iceberg. I think it's fascinating that this graphic image has set the table for modern conspiracy theory. I wonder why. I think this stuff on this show, because I cover obscure stuff. That is this show's specialty. And Going Obscure does it as well. But it's rare. Most people do episodes about Loch Ness Monster, or the bloop sound, or quantum reality, or gray aliens on the moon, whatever. Stuff like that. Stuff that you've heard 100 times. I go out of my way to find obscure stuff. Other podcasts and YouTube channels do, but not as many as you'd think or would hope. The conspiracy theory iceberg, what is it about that image that makes people so fascinated with it? I didn't finish my original thought. I think you could almost build your own conspiracy theory iceberg just out of the topics on this show. And if you made a conspiracy theory iceberg and you had all this stuff and you submitted that out, people would be like, what in the world is... This is nonsense. This is absolute nonsense. None of these phrases make sense. Hats cure autism, the yawn machine. What? What is this stuff? John Storm knows Peter Parker. You'd be like, what in the world is going on? I feel like, and again, I'm not discounting the iceberg. I think it's fascinating. One, I think I've covered most of the stuff that I want to cover on the iceberg. There's probably another 20 or 30 topics that I find interesting. We did one recently. I don't even remember what it was. Oh, the number stations post-Trump. That was a really cool story. I really liked researching that. But the conspiracy theory iceberg overall, there's probably only 20 or 30 more stories that I want to pull off of that. Some weirdo on Twitter, aka Jack, has that Excel spreadsheet he created. Makes it very easy to research this stuff. And let me read you some of these on here. The Blackbird at Chernobyl. That's a Mothman. That's a variation of Mothman. Somebody saw a creature at Chernobyl. That's the whole story. I'm sure I could tell you guys that, but that's literally the whole story. On a gloomy September morning, or whatever day it was, Chernobyl. I mean, that's the whole thing. The 8.5 minute gap is a reference to the Nixon tapes. There's a missing gap. That's super. That's not obscure at all. We can go through this. We can go through these things. Abandoned mall catacombs. See, that's something that. Let me tell you how, and you can hear it in this SpongeBob episode. So, abandoned mall catacombs, for example. That's on the conspiracy theory iceberg. This is how I would structure that episode. First off, I would introduce the concept of abandoned mall catacombs. That would take about 2 or 3 minutes. Obviously, people know what those are. Then I'll go over the traditional conspiracy theories that people would associate with those. Human trafficking, give you some statistics on human trafficking and tunnels that they use to move people in and out of countries. Shanghai tunnels, I could build that. The conspiracy theory that reptilians are underneath the mall tunnels in Utah. I could go back over that. We covered that on an episode. And then I would say, let's put on our conspiracy caps. And I would craft a conspiracy theory that fits that. And there we go. That's the end of it. But that's not a super intriguing conspiracy theory for me. But what's interesting, though, is like, let's say I cover that and say it's on the conspiracy theory iceberg. That episode actually gets more hits. Really bizarre. Really bizarre. Even though, I mean, let's say I didn't say that it was a conspiracy theory iceberg. The Guatemalan stone head doesn't get a ton of hits. Because I don't know it's on the conspiracy theory iceberg. Ancient automa. So old robots. They have Ranker articles, BuzzFeed articles on that. That's on the conspiracy theory iceberg. I'm less interested at this point on the topics in the conspiracy theory iceberg than who created the iceberg in the first place. Remember when it first came out in 2017? People were like, this is word soup. This doesn't make any sense. This is nonsense. And you would type in eggless travel and nothing would pop up. Michigan blue hell. Dublin, Wisconsin. You'd get a little bit of rumor. I started covering those stories. Those are actually some of my biggest episodes. Surprisingly, eggless travel is not in my top 5. Usually my biggest episodes are like the golf rumors. Nicotine is health benefit, I think was the name of it. That's always in like my top 5 episodes. Golf rumor flies in and out of the top 10. Medieval found footage. People jump onto that thinking there's actually going to be footage of medieval times, and then they immediately leave. And then the rest of the top 10 is made of the last 8 episodes. So usually I get 2 or 3 from the conspiracy theory iceberg in my top 10. And this is for the day. I get like stats every day or every 2 days or something like that. So imagine if golf rumors wasn't on the conspiracy theory iceberg. It just simply wasn't on there. And then I covered it because someone recommended it and say, have you ever heard about golf rumors? It's this weird thing that me and my buddies were talking about in Saskatchewan. I look it up, can't really find anything, kind of fiddle around with it, put that episode out. It's weird. And there's so much stuff missing from the iceberg. You do think it's word soup. I remember thinking it was word soup. What convinced me that at least part of it was real was the Britney Spears one, the Britney Spears original doll. You guys know I'm a huge Britney Spears fan. I saw that and I go, this is fake. I'm the biggest Britney Spears fan in the world. I got 10 restraining orders to prove it. I typed in Britney Spears original doll and I found an article from Vice or Cosmo or something like that talking about her lost album. Oh. That's what made me go, the conspiracy theory, at least parts of it are real. Here's the story. She wrote an album. She wrote like a couple songs, and her studio told her not to release it. It wasn't really good. And she went to a radio station as Britney Spears. She just knocked on the door, and they're like, oh my God, Britney Spears is outside the radio station. They let her in, and they played the song, Original Doll, and she walked out of the radio station, and her recording studio ripped her a new one. They said, 1, that's our music. You don't have the right. Those are our masters. You don't have the right to leave with that stuff. It's our property. You stole from us. 2, we told you we weren't going to release that song because it sucks. And 3, refer to 1 and 2. I don't think they had 3 reasons. That's all they had. People have stretched it because I guess there's a lyric in the song where it's like, sometimes I don't feel like me. Sometimes I'm lost. And people go, oh, it's because of Monarch mind control. She was trying to break free. No, it's just a very sad and lonely woman who's been controlled most of her life, who wrote a poem and put it to music. And she doesn't write her own music. She buys her music from like Shania Twain. She goes through these songwriting catalogs. She wrote a song. She tried to have it played. It was played on LA radio, and then she just got tore a new one because you can't do that. That's the whole story. I, as a Britney Spears fan, find it incredibly fascinating because I'll just devour any Britney Spears news possible. But people try to make it into this mind control thing, but it's not. It's just that, because I talk about this all the time. That's the sexy conspiracy theory. The true story is that this woman has no control over her life. And even in that, even when she broke laws, you can't do that. The song still never got released. So that's on the conspiracy theory iceberg. And there's a lot of stuff like that that is fairly short that I find fascinating. I find that fascinating. But eggless travel, when I researched that, I go, this is actually real. Not that eggless travel is real, but whoever crafted this iceberg knew these conspiracy theories. And A-list travel was so obscure. That was the most research I've ever done on an episode. That may still be the most research I'd ever done on an episode. Grand Soy Unified Theory took a ton of research as well, but not as much as A-list travel. So like I said, there's probably 20, 30 more topics off the old icebergs. The new icebergs, they don't make any sense. They're total. Let's look at some of the post. Jack also put these up. Here's some post 2017 iceberg topics. Skippy, that's all that it says. 1977 never happened. 2000 is not a number. Afterbirth jellyfish. What? AIDS cures cancer. Like, these are jokes. These are not real. After 2017, which I love that Jack put this together. After 2017, they just don't make any sense. Like, you can obviously tell this stuff is made up. Some of them, like here we have one, artificial wombs. Okay, that's a real thing. What about ass masks? What does that even mean? I almost feel like I want to start doing the joke one. Bart Simpson 9/11 warning, but live stream cut. Remember that? Remember when they, I mean, they're funny. I'll give them that. The brain is optional. Bratz vs. Barbie World Star Hip Hop fight video. These are now mixed in to the... Well, I really don't refer to icebergs post-2017 because of stuff like this. I could just keep reading these. What else do we have here? Cell phone radiation killed God. Chairs were invented post-World War II. There's a lot of stuff like that. A Chernobyl incident caused by CIA. I don't know. That one might be real. Child time traveler sent by the world government to manufacture events. This is obviously in alphabetical order. I'm not like sorting through them like that. Let's see here. This fascist raccoons. It sounds fascinating. Flintstones and Jetsons take place in the same universe. I've actually heard of that one. Human volcano farms. You know, so they they obviously sound like stuff on the traditional one. On the traditional conspiracy theory. Sorry, now I'm fascinated by looking through this stuff. KFC and McDonald's, Anunnaki spokespersons, McDonald's, chaos magic. That's a good, might be the best sentence ever written. This is literally me just reading stuff you guys can click off, but I think these are pretty awesome. Masks are real people's faces. There, we have that one. We have it on the mask one. Max Spear's death. That's real. I mean, I actually covered that on my show. Medieval gangster music. Oh, no. It's not. Meditative gangster music. I thought mine was better. Miley Cyrus is not Hannah Montana. That's interesting. I don't even know where you'd go with that one. Neo took the blue pill. That'd be an interesting one. Nickelodeon Freemasonry. That's probably true. Rick and Morty is real footage. I mean, I could keep reading these. I could pretty much just do a whole episode. Sex toys designed to cripple you. It's probably real. But anyways, I probably should just wrap up this. So I almost feel like I want to unravel the mystery of who created the iceberg in the first place. Like, obviously a person or people got together to craft this, and they put in some stuff that then people the following month had no idea where to find it. That's what I find so odd about the conspiracy theory iceberg. I'm almost looking at it on a meta level at this point. Who created it and why? And why are people more fascinated with the conspiracy theory iceberg than a standard super obscure topic? I can't figure that out. That's something maybe you will think about. Maybe you will do my mental thinking for me and reach out to me and say, this is why I like it on... Think about it this way, and actually, yeah, I'd like to hear back from you guys, either email or Gmail, that's the same thing, or YouTube comments. Why is it if the phrase... If Golf Rumors was not on the conspiracy theory iceberg, would you want to hear about it? Would you have ever listened to that episode? And let's say if Yerba Buena Vampires was on... You know what I mean? Like, now I guess I'm probably overcomplicating things, but... What is it about being on the conspiracy theory iceberg that makes it more intriguing than any of the other obscure topics we've covered on the show? Because I can tell you right now, there's a lot of topics I've covered on the show that I did not know was on the conspiracy theory iceberg. And afterwards, I was like, oh, but I've never gone back to record a new intro, but if I had changed the title or changed the intro, it would get more views. So what is driving that? That's your homework for this weekend. I'd like an essay. I'd like a 500-word essay from all of you, and if you send it to me at just the right time, I'll respond immediately. deadrabbitradio@gmail.com is going to be your email address. You can also hit us up at facebook.com/deadrabbitradio. Twitter is @deadrabbitradio. Dead Rabbit Radio is the daily paranormal, conspiracy, and true crime podcast. You don't have to listen to it every day, but I'm glad you listened to it today. Have a great weekend, guys. We'll be back with Season 12 on Monday.